another Thursday edition of the Kitchen Table Conversations with some of men and masculine folks based in Minnesota here. This is our 42nd show. For those of you who have been following us or may have just gotten to us, we've had previous shows as well, or talks as well, and discussions as well. My name is Pheng, he, him pronouns, and I will pass it on to my colleagues here to share their names as well too, and their pronouns, and then we will move from there in terms of the discussion today.
Hey everybody, my name is Sean Hayes and my pronouns are he, him, and his.
Hey, what's up? My name is Serrano Robinson. I use he, him, his, and I'm in Duluth right now.
And hey, my name's Pentti. This is my first time on this, and my pronouns are he, him, and his, and I am in Duluth as well.
Thank you. Welcome, Pentti, again. Again, this is a space where we as men and masculine folks are just having conversations and staying conversations really about how to practice healthy masculinity in light of all the issues that we're navigating in our own personal lives and in the world and in our community and society at the same time. And how do we ensure that how we're expressing our masculinity and manhood are in healthy ways and it doesn't actually impact the people around us and the relationships we're in too much. So just a reminder there, and welcoming all of you who are joining us on Facebook Live at this moment. Please definitely chat in. Let us know your thoughts, your feelings, your opinions, your questions that you may have as we're having the conversation that we're going to have today. Before I go into talking about that, I want to really give space for Serrano to really lead us in this moment, because it's been a hard past few weeks for many of us. We've lost a lot of people. And so I want to give it to Serrano to lead us in that moment first.
Thank you. Yeah, so just a quick moment before we get into the conversation. I just would like to have a quick moment of silence just for all the lives that we've lost, like as a community in general, especially specifically due to violence. So if you are listening or watching, just a quick couple moments and then we'll come back to the conversation. So in 3, 2, 1. Thank y'all for that. And I'll pass that to you, Pheng.
Thank you, Serrano. Yeah, I think we hadn't been on a while for about 2-3 weeks here. I think that we hadn't been on a while. Hopefully we'll get back on track again. There's just been other things that have taken some of us away, and so we haven't been able to hold space to have these conversations. So we miss all of you who continue to watch us and follow us, and we miss one another as well too when we are in this space and having these conversations. They feel so far and so removed at the same time, and like that we're so separate. At least for me, I feel that way. But I recognize, to Serrano's point there, to what I was sharing earlier, that a lot of violence has been happening in the last 3 weeks or so, or more. Right? We had the Buffalo shooting in New York, where a person went into a predominantly Black neighborhood and Black grocery store and killed a lot of folks there, 10 folks, if I'm not mistaken. Then we had the Texas shooting in the school in Uvalde, Texas last week, with 19 kids and one teacher. And then sadly enough, that teacher's partner also died of a heart attack as well too, which makes it even sadder because they have the kids who are now going to be cared for by other caregivers in the community or by other family members. And then today, or last night, or yesterday in Tulsa, where 4 people were killed at a hospital as well too. So, and then we know that was tons of gun violence, obviously, that had happened, and shootings that had happened over Memorial Day weekend as well too. And so it's a lot. And it parallels to, or it moves in conjunction to, I should say, it moves in conjunction to us celebrating Pride this month, celebrating LGBTQ people, gender non-conforming folks, gender non-binary folks, celebrating their lives, their experiences, who they are, lifting up their visibility, lifting up their identities, lifting up really who they are. And so it comes at such a odd pairing of lifting up LGBTQ and gender non-binary folks, their experiences this month. And obviously it's not only this month, but this is really the month for us to do that celebratory, you know, and with all of this violence that we've seen in the last couple of weeks, it comes at that kind of a junction for us, at least for me in this moment, as we're coming to circle and we're coming to the kitchen table and really having these conversations. I'm not quite sure what you know, what to move or what to do or where to go, but I think my heart obviously is heavy towards parents who've lost their kids, because those kids are the same age as my 10-year-old. And I think about that every day as you go to school. And obviously in doing this work, my head is always on prevention, that many of these things can actually be prevented. And many of you here know very well that many of these things can actually be prevented. And so is that the conversation, or is the conversation around reactionary and reacting to it and saying, hey, it's that individual person's fault only, and focusing just on that individual only and nothing else, and not looking at the systemic pieces that actually allow for the violence to actually happen. And I think the responsibility lies on all of us, you know. So I am in this moment framing that junction for us of these two things and these events that are happening, and at the same time, so really honored and joyful to be celebrating LGBTQ individuals and their community and all that they've done and the way in which they have moved and the violence that their community still continues to experience, right? That LGBTQ folks still continue to experience in this community. I had a colleague a couple of weeks ago at this convening that I was a part of who came from Mississippi, and she was like, if people found out that you were trans, we live in the South, and they will say, we don't serve your kind. And they can actually call the cops on you. Right. And so that's the kind of violence that still happens in the year 2022. So I just want to name all those things for all of you. And that I am, you know, both very heavy in the heart and also very joyful simultaneously, you know.
Yeah, I can definitely appreciate Peng, how you're talking about that. Like it's sort of like this juxtaposition that I think is sort of this larger lesson that I've been learning, I think the past couple of years, at least, maybe longer, which is, you know, the idea that there are multiple truths, there are multiple things that are true in this moment. There is tragedy, and yeah, as a parent, I definitely echo, you know, your fears and thinking about your kiddo Peng, and so holding all of the horrifying stuff that continues to happen, and how we respond to that, I think, is always really challenging, at least for me. You know, it's like, and that's sort of the larger conversation that always happens is bad thing happens, thoughts and prayers, we should do something about it, nothing happens, and then bad thing happens again. And so, yeah, that feels really challenging to not know how to make that bigger shift that is needed. Because I think, you know, you're absolutely right. I don't think this is a case by case individuals who need, you know, help, or who are, whatever the story may be, mentally unstable, like all of those stories that come forward about these people who perpetrate the violence. It is this larger systemic oppression that allows men and masculine folks to express our hurt feelings, our anger, our loneliness, through violence. Um, and and all that's happening. And as a queer person, as a trans person, as someone who loves my community, it it does sort of feel like, ooh, should I be feeling these good feelings too? So it's hard to hold all of that, and yet it is all true, and I am excited that it's Pride Month. I am joyful when I think about the brilliance and beauty and creativity that our community brings to the world, the globe. Um, I mean, even that makes me emotional thinking about it on the other spectrum of like that happy emotion of like, this is so cool that we get to celebrate each other and our community in this way. So, um, yeah, happy Pride. Because it is, and I'm prideful, and I just, before I'll pause here, for all of the folks in the LGBTQ plus community, happy Pride. And also, if you're someone who's not out, and who's not really able to celebrate that in an open way, I just want to recognize you and, yeah, that I see you. I'm glad you're part of our community, and wishing you a very good Pride this month.
Of course, I have questions. I feel pretty out of the loop on what Pride is and what that time is for, and I'm curious about those things. I'm also really curious about I think what we have started off talking about, in terms of how to balance exposure to really awful things, and then the while also having the joy in our lives that we want and should have. Um, I feel like I actually had experience last night of running into an old buddy. I was out sitting outside somewhere eating with my partner, and this person came up, and I think they were like saying something to the effect of like, it's summertime, like, it's time to party. And then they were sort of like, are we allowed to do that right now? Like, what sort of, like, how do we, given how, upturned everything feels? And I would be really curious to hear from all of you, like, if I don't know, if you have any things you would share about how you create containers for all of to keep the awfulness and the joy separate, or how you hold those things simultaneously. I don't know. I'm curious to hear what you all do.
Yeah, I'll just go through like my initial thoughts, and then folks can like carry on the answers to the question that Pentti asked. Yeah, definitely like a balance. First off, I agree with that. Like, happy Pride Month. This is one of the months where I really wish like it. And weird. So let me say this clearly. I wish it wasn't summer, only because we could be around youth. I feel like this month would be a month that like the youth you would really see a lot of the future in this month. I mean, I have to say, like, this year was like super like energy feeling for me, as far as like, you know, understanding genders and understanding race, understanding non-binary, understanding that people just have their own identities, and that if we love them, we respect that, we honor that, and we uplift that. This year was one of the like, honestly, the toughest years to like even go through stereotypes. Like, the kids really wasn't having that shit. Like, if you were telling them, a young kid couldn't wear blue, they'd be ready to fight about it. If you tell them like a young kid couldn't wear pink, they'd be ready to fight about it. If you tell them that, they couldn't do a certain thing, they'd be ready to fight about it. So I think for me, like, half of that feeling is like just super duper hopeful for the future. Like every time I look at these young kids, I'm like, oh yeah, this is exactly what we've been looking for. This is exactly what we've been doing. Just seeing them just being so open, so understanding. Just in the way to where you just see like 20 years from now, like nothing goes away fully, within time, but things like get less and less and less. And I can just see like 20 years from now, people being more fluent in understanding different identities and actually being more like interested in understanding different identities. Because I think that's a whole nother part too, is you have to be interested in that and show that you care. You can't just say that you care, you have to show that. So I like half of that feeling of like definitely feeling like good going forward is like knowing that the youth are carrying the torch. They're doing a lot better than I am and a lot better than we are. So that's always a good feeling for me. Is to know that they have that authentic aura and that they're being fed with that. They're being able to walk around being themselves. Like we talked, like me and one of my coworkers were talking about it. I think it was me and Kia, I believe. But we were just like, yeah, a lot of these students are like just glamoring with, with confidence, like way more confidence than 90s to like the early 2000s kids is they going crazy in the good way. And that's why I say like, they're doing the damn thing. They're pushing it forward. They're being unapologetic. They're saying that they don't care how you comment about how they feel. Like, so I think like for me, like the feeling of balance comes in like the hopefulness of the youth, like being in front of them. Um, and they're also having like a good time, realizing that it is summer. It is a time of like, the trees becoming greener, the trees becoming bigger, and us just having like like the anti-Grinch feeling of, your heart growing 3 times, the size because it's warm outside now. So just honoring that, having fun with your fellow people. Um, but then there's the other half of that balance too, right? Like there's a part of where it's definitely tough, seeing hearing of people like losing their lives because of who they are, because of their identity, right? There's a part of me who love to work with youth and uplift their identity and also know that people are being hurt literally and specifically because of who they are. Um, and that just simply like is not a yeah, it's not a good feeling. It's very like disgusting for me because I see exactly where we put our energy to. Instead of uplifting folks and their identities, we putting um, our energy into being disgusting people, into being disgusting. Like we worry more about who somebody identify as. At the same time, kids are being taken away from us. Now I'm gonna be honest, like this is gonna sound hard coming from me, but I think a lot of it is like our fault. Um, because yes, if we were spending less time worrying about how the fuck people, and not in like a good way, because you're supposed to be open to this, but if we spent less time worrying about how people like identified in a bad way, or I have so many people in my corner who love to fucking talk about like LGBTQ, but I don't hear nobody talking about people who are committing these big ass acts of violence. Like I'm so disgusted that where we put our energy to is like, and I'm trying to say it the right way, so please forgive me and I apologize if I don't, because I've been thinking about this shit and it's really disgusting me. I'm like, yeah, I have literal friends and shit and people who are just like, who would rather have more to fucking say about somebody who like their own gender than somebody who's literally taking lives away, right? Like this is the energy that we're evolving to. Like instead of saying, hey, this person's buying guns at 18, being able to do all these things with no mental background, with no actual checks, we're looking at the color of people's shirts, the fucking color of their shoes, who they like. So I think like I balance a lot with like, damn, like, well, if we were paying more attention to these white folks shooting up shit, then maybe we wouldn't have as much fucking time to be downing people, to making people feel like they're less than, to make people feel like, that they don't need to be here. Like I'm super duper like sadly disgusted with like our people right now. I'm not even gonna lie to you. And I'm not talking about the four of us. I mean like as a collective, as a community, as a human race, like that shit just like it threw me off. I'm like, damn. So this is what we like. This is what it is like. You know, I can see more hateful shit coming towards Pride this month than anybody who's ever done anything violent towards a group of people. And I know that it sounds hard, but I'm just one of those people who are like very honest. Because I feel like that's hurtful to not be honest. It's hurtful to it's hurtful to be like, that's not like it is true. I have people in yeah, and I know for sure it's like on a big level because like I said, it's people that are close to me who literally have more to say about that than the fucking children being taken away, than the women being murdered, than the children being kidnapped, than everything that's happening that's actually causing harm. I think sadly right now, and maybe that's even a part of the system, right? Is to have us fucking fight against each other instead of actually fighting the real problem or fighting the real violence that is among us as people. So I'm not even gonna lie, I don't really know where I was going with that, honestly. Um, I think I'm just feeling the understanding of what Sean said of the multiple truths, and that's kind of my reaction to it. So
Yeah, just hearing from all of you, I think that even to what you're sharing there, Serrano, is that you don't actually have to have a point, right? And I think that that's why it's so necessary for us to create these kinds of spaces for us as men and masculine folks to actually just like sort of do that questioning that Pentti is asking. It's like, how are you doing that? Right. And being in conversation with one another to be able to just say, hey, I'm thinking about these things. Like that, no solution has to come about, like that, trying to find a solution isn't necessary. But I think what's meaningful in this is the ability to be able to actually have a space where we as men and masculine folks can actually just say, hey, this is what actually I'm feeling and thinking right now. Now, how do I move from here becomes the individual choice. And then, like, how do I move in this in conjunction to how Sean is moving, how Pentti, how Serrano, and others who I'm in relationship with are moving in their life, right? So I find myself that I'm glad that we're here today in this moment. And that we're at this, I'm not glad that we're at this juncture, but that this juncture presents the opportunity that this space that we have all been a part of and holding and doing and moving and that people have been a part of with us is so necessary, and that the visibility of creating such a space is such needed for us to be able to actually do that unloading and do that navigation with one another. And I hope that for those of you who are listening to us and who've been following us and engaging with us, continue to do that in your own lives, and continue to do that with your own networks, and continue to do that with your own neighbors, with your family members who are male identified, who are men. Like, keep creating those spaces, because that's what we're going to really need, right? We know that men and masculine folks going at this alone will oftentimes put them into the dark tunnel, quote unquote, right? Or into a very isolated and secluded place in their own lives, emotionally and physically and socially as well too. And I think that these are the moments where we need community, as we believe in value so much, is community of men and masculine folks who we can actually count on, who can actually go in for support. And I think that to some of what Pentti you're asking is, I'm lifting these up because I think you're asking the relevant questions about, like, how do we as men and masculine do this? How do we navigate these things? And I for one, so firmly believe in these kinds of spaces and the ways in which I have relationships with everyone that's here and everybody that is not here as well too. The way in which we're connected to one another, right? And that is, I think, the sort of balancing act and the moving act of doing both the celebration and the mourning and the grief together, right? Separately, right? Because no one person alone can do that grieving. No one person alone can do that joy by themselves, right? And I think that that's why these spaces are so critical, and the way in which we actually have created these spaces and this kitchen table conversations for us to be in is so critical, because I don't know where else I would be able to sort of like unload some of my thoughts or feelings. Doing it with you all is different than doing it with my group of cousins, right? And the conversation is different. The conversations are different. But what it does is it allows me to actually keep navigating and keep practicing healthy masculinity. I know that for one. And what it also does is it allows me to actually keep being responsible and being accountable within my own life and the way in which I envision myself as a male identified person moving and the vision of my own manhood for myself and my own masculinity, and my own purpose, right, of why I exist and why I'm here. And so I'm appreciative of that. And I hope that those of you who are listening can actually afford to create many circles and not just one, and that because the more circles you can actually create, I believe the more you're going to be able to actually like get the kind of offering or support that you need to do what it is that is needed in that moment, either for you or for other people, and it's not always necessarily just for us in this moment only. And the other thing that I wanted to point out, obviously, is that I think that at some point, somebody has shared this, I think Sean, you did, is that many of these things that we've seen in terms of the violence that has happened over the last few weeks has been done by cisgender men, right? That it has been done by cisgender men. So that's an issue. That is actually a problem. And I think that that's why it's important for us to have these conversations and really name those things, right? At least for me, is to really name that it's just cisgender men who are doing these things, and they're moving in this way, and who are doing and committing the acts of violence. And yet we know that it is something that people see as very normal. I don't wish this. I don't wish this at all. But if it were to be a queer person or a woman person that did the shooting and the violence, I think the conversation would be very different. It would be very different. Maybe perhaps people will act quicker on legislation. Maybe there will be new policies and laws in place because queer people don't do that, or women folks don't do that. But because it's just gender men who are doing and committing the acts of violence, it seemed as very, very normal at the same time too. And I think that that's the other paradox in this that we've seen, is that as much as we feel sad and are saying we are heavy-hearted, I don't want to minimize any of that. That's all true. And yet at the same time, we know in our society, cisgender men committing violence is very, very normal. It is not out of the norm. We see it on TV every day. We see it play out in our own lives every day, and the people who we're in relationship with every day, and so what does that mean, and what does that say for who we are as a community and as a society?
I have ideas on this, but Sean, is anything coming up for you with any of the stuff that's being said?
I think lots is swirling. I'm definitely processing, so please.
Well, I would just say, Peng, I'm glad that you're pointing out the community thing is like, or having community, having people you can grieve with, and who hold you accountable in thinking about, or as we think about losses like this. It seems really key, because there's also, like, I know there's a tendency in myself to, when I'm exposed to really horrible stuff like this, to kind of want to, like, I don't know, retreat into like maybe my own, I don't know, like your own awareness of the tragedy ends up being enough. And then you don't, you might be sort of so disgusted with other people and whatnot that you're better off just not interacting with them. And like we're talking about, isolation and loneliness is probably one of the root causes of, or at least one of the corresponding feelings to acts of violence like we're talking about. I also just, and this is just sort of, this is also just swirling around and unformed in my head, but like, I think there are connections between you know, I feel like we've got these two. We were talking about pride, and then we're also talking about these recent acts of violence. And I don't know. I mean, it's definitely worth pointing out that you know, queer people are specifically targeted in mass acts of violence like that, and that there's also, and this is sort of what to what Serrano was saying. There's an argument I've seen made that is like that places blame on for shootings like this on like a moral degradation of our society or something. And I think that's really interesting because my guess is that if a person, if the people who buy into that were to have to point out the things that make up that moral degradation of our society, or our evidence of a moral degradation of our society, they would probably somehow implicate queer people. They, you know, and so I think like there's like a weird transference of blame that happens. Yeah, there's definitely, these things definitely aren't separate, that's for sure.
That's wild that you just brought that up, because I was just having a conversation with someone about this very concept of like why is the violence happening? And yeah, the loss of morality is what we talked about. And so that, yeah, I just like the universe is cool like that, that you would bring that in when I just had this conversation. And so I definitely know that narrative and that sort of side of things. And it's interesting because, you know, when I think about the work that we do, like on our end of things, when we think about violence prevention, you know, changing systems of oppression, you know, that also feels like a moral cause, you know, to rid our country and our world of oppression and of racism and of sexism and transphobia and homophobia. You know, so it's very interesting to think about how folks come at this sort of from, you know, opposing sides, it seems, but it's like we're all trying to make sense of something that feels senseless. And I think it's really easy to just sort of write that off as like, well, humanity's morality is gone, or whether we say humanity is sinful, or like whatever the words we use. It's like that feels like a really easy sort of write off, kind of cop out thing. Well, what are you doing then? What are we doing you know, to prevent and to reduce the violence that's happening? And yeah, definitely the LGBT community is always sort of in that morality conversation. And I think I don't know what the answer is. You know, and now I'm like, well, I'm probably rambling a bit, but also it's like we can't actually figure out any of that if we can't even be in the same rooms as these folks, right? If we can't have conversations about, well, why do you think this is happening? What do you think we should do about gun control? Or, you know, like, I mean, and most folks aren't willing to sit in those rooms together to have the conversations anymore, because we are so you know, siloed and sort of separated between blue and red, you know, whatever, Christian and non-Christian, however you would sort of say that. But gosh, yeah, I don't know how many times I've heard that though, as a queer and trans person, that, you know, my lifestyle, my choice of lifestyle is, you know, sinful or is immoral or unnatural, all of those things. And so that is something that every queer person, I am sure, has dealt with at least a couple of times in this world, in this country particularly. And yeah, I mean, I could talk about hate crimes in the community as well. I mean, that's a huge thing. Trans women of color are murdered at horrendous rates, horrendous. I mean, it is literally an epidemic that, these Black trans activists all over this country are trying to raise the alarm about. And that's really important to talk about. And it can feel, really overwhelming as a queer person to be like, yeah, all this stuff is constantly happening to us. We're constantly faced with harassment, discrimination, all of those things every day. And so I think, especially during Pride Month, for me at least, it's like I really, really want to focus on the joy aspect of like, what is it we're working towards? What does this community look like if our little rainbow community expanded and like it was like all of our allies and like we were building this beautiful, safe, inclusive community, And so for me, thinking about how I hold these really hard things, kind of bringing it back. For me, I really have to like refocus myself on the hope and the joy that I see and that I'm a part of creating. I feel like I have a responsibility to do that in my community and in my family. And so, yeah, on the days where it's just like I'm frozen, I'm paralyzed, or feeling, feelings of just utter shock and sadness. Luckily, usually someone like in this group here or within my, chosen family will reach out, or, like something will happen where it's like it's a redirect that I need to like, okay, like look up, remember why I'm here, what I'm doing, what is so beautiful about our world, and continuing to like bring those things forward.
I feel like that's a really good point too. Like that's actually like, damn, now that I think about it, that's how I created joy too. I think it's like because I asked myself like, well, what are you for? And that immediately makes me happy, right? Like obviously, and when we look at those two questions, like we're geared to be emotional based on the question that you asked. So it's like, what are you against? People love to ask that fucking question, and we love to have that conversation. Even myself, it's like, well, I'm not against that. Well, I'm not against that. But we don't have conversations on like, well, what are you for? And that really does bring me like joy. The hope, like the joy for me is like, oh yeah, I'm for like people loving each other. So when I see somebody like, I'm like weird. So when I see somebody walking down the street and they're like, and I can feel the energy and they're just loving each other, just having a good time. I'm like, okay, that's it. All right, that's. So I think it's also about like the reality too, because I can never walk down a street and be like, yeah, this is just all bad. This is just all terrible. That's just not true. Even on this call right now, we're doing something that is a good thing and it's a positive thing. Now, it might take a lot of energy and it may like, bring us like towards certain emotions to have these, but I think these are also like points of joy. It's just talking about these moments because I think sadly too, like deep down, yeah, we all like as human beings, we all do want the same like three things, right? Like we all 3 to 5, right? We all really want like, to be safe. We all really want our families, to be safe and sound, to be heard. We want to be financially like well, whatever that means for you. We want to be able to also, travel through the things that we like. And then I think at some point we hit like a mix of like, well, you don't like me, or you don't do what I do, or you don't, and like we lose that immediately. And it's like, if you're for everybody, if you're actually for the safe space of everybody, if you're actually for the healthy humanity of everybody, then that's how the conversation should go. So I actually like, I love how you said that because that's actually what brings me my joy is I know exactly what I'm for. I'm for everybody like coming into their own skin, into their own vibe, the way you want to, and loving yourself and be a love doing that, being supportive about doing that. And that just makes me happy no matter what. Like I could see a random person shooting basketballs in the gym or see somebody randomly like with their partner at a coffee shop, like just random things like that is what brings me joy. So I love like you bringing that up because I think that immediately answers your question, Pentti. Is like it definitely is easy to like we say balance, but it's easy to have one side heavier than the other. Um, so to help out with the joys, yeah, I think for me, it's not even also what's just going forward. It's what's happening at the moment. So I think for me too, it's like when I say in the future, that's a very escape from reality right now, right? Like, I can't keep just bringing the children in, bring up right now, bring up the fact that, people can, live their lives and it's a little bit rocky and it's harmful for a lot of folks. Um, but the everyday work that we're doing, the everyday work that I'm doing is trying and making a difference. To some folks it may seem like that is small, but I think for me that is, yeah. So thank you for easily bringing up that question of like, well, what are you for? Like, because I'd be like, yeah, I think that's actually like, damn, that might be the question that brings us like, and not even on some kumbaya shit that bring us all together. That sounds like off the wall, but I feel like that would be a good open question because yeah, all I really heard is like, well, I'm not with that, but I ain't with that, but I ain't with. But now you see how the argument's already starting. It don't even matter what side you're sitting on. Instead of asking like, well, what are you for? I'm actually for, humans being coming into their full self. And then we could talk about what that means. Like now we could talk about what my vision of what that means and how you come along. And, I think that would be a more healthier conversation too, and to have that conversation with people who you don't agree with, like to lean into having that, like, well, what do you see like as your end all be all for your life, your family, and then coming to like inching more and more by having conversation, open conversation, unjudgmental conversation about how we get to there, like as two different people. So I think I just really like echo that. Yeah, I echo that question for sure. Like asking folks like, well, what are you for then? And let's see how we can connect on that aspect. Because immediately once you're like, well, I'm not for that, well, you ain't for that, I could just see us walking away, right? Like that's what happens most of the time. You either leave the function, you leave the person, you leave the entity, you leave the aura, you leave whatever's behind, but the harm remains the same. So maybe what I'll do now is like I'll ask, well, what are you for then? Because you seem to be you seem to be against a lot of shit, and I hear that. I don't understand that, but I hear that. Like, what are you for? So thank you for providing that.
Yeah, I think about, to me, in the context of like, if we think about prevention, that question is really a prevention question, right? In the context of prevention, in terms of what are you for? You are thinking about how do we then, and you start thinking about and processing and thinking about solutions about what could potentially be that could then allow for the conditions and environment to not allow for people to choose violence. What would it be, right? What would it take for the conditions in our environment, and what will we need that doesn't get people to choose and get to that place where they feel that, especially for men, masculine folks, and cisgender men and masculine folks, I should say, to get to that place where they feel that they have to actually choose the violence. And I know that you all, I've shared this in many respects at times, is like when we talk to people who've committed harm, like these acts of violence, and how they got to that place, and how they got to that place of choosing, it wasn't because they woke up one day and was like, today's the day I'm gonna go to prison, right? Or they didn't get to this place where they're like, there has been something, I want to say, what I'm trying to say is there has been something in their processing and in that justification and in that belief system of theirs, which is actually in our environment, which is actually in our narrative of how men should be. And that is one piece of the root, is the narrative of how men should be in this world that justifies for them to then say, yes, violence is okay. That me choosing this route is okay. And that is necessary, right? So the one root of masculinity and manhood and patriarchy that we have in some semblance been talking about gives permission for men, cisgender men, to commit harm and to commit acts of violence, right? It's not anger, it's that aggression that is okay. And then the one root around that individual saying that is okay is because we've seen instances of the society saying violence is okay, right? Whether it is through the military and war, that violence is okay to kill people, and we say not to kill civilians, but it happens. We say not to rape women and children during war, but it happens. during wartime, that we don't address often, right? And yet it goes back to this one conversation I know we had a long time ago, and I think that and Chris was here and he so eloquently stated it, of like whose violence gets justified and gets gets the permission to say that violence is okay, right? And so the question of the four to me really is about prevention. If we are for the healthy lives of men and masculine folks and cisgender men who we really love and truly admire in our own lives and ourselves, what does it mean for us to not get to places where we don't choose violence? Right? What does it mean? What does it mean? Because I know that any day of the week and any time of the week, I could potentially choose it. There's no difference between me and the person who went and did the shooting at Uvalde. We're not too far from each other. It wasn't because he was like had some mental health issue, to Sean's point. He had a clean record. You know, people who have mental health issues, I, for one, who know well that, and working with people who have mental health issues, don't go and don't have a strategic idea of what they're going to be doing in terms of like going out and shooting people and targeting people. Right? They don't go berserk and do like quote unquote and are doing that. It's actually, if you look at all the people who have killed, who are generally again cisgender men, they're very strategic in how they do it and how they move and how they, yeah, there may be some narcissism to their personality, quote unquote. There may be some other you know, grandiose ideas about who they are or whatever the case may be to their personality, but it's not like they're like unable to think. They're very strategic and they know what they're doing, and there's a real intent there, to really cause harm through violence, right? And then they also understand that there's actually consequences to it as well too. They actually recognize that there's consequences to it as well too. And time and again, we've seen that, we've talked about it here, and I know in this space, where especially in rape cases, where some cisgender, mostly white men, young men who are in college, get away with it, get reduced sentence. Judges don't believe that they did it. Juries don't believe. The community doesn't even believe, because they're like, what's going to happen to this young man's life? That young man's life is more important than the life of the person that they committed the violence towards. So yes, are the lives of kids important? If we say they are, then the question begs us to actually really think about, how do we do prevention then? But if we're just like, oh, we're just sad and kids matter to us, but we're not talking about prevention, then I think that we're gonna just keep giving permission for people to use violence, right? Especially cisgender men, to keep using violence, right? And the permission giving comes from us as well too, indirectly. It indirectly comes from us as well too, because we are not talking about it. We are not naming those things.
I was just thinking about that normalization, or how we normalize the violence. And this is, I mean, you know, I know we're getting close to the end of our time here today, but another way that came into my mind is like how we teach young boys and masculine kids to like stand up for themselves and to fight against the bully. And, you know, like, yeah, there's just a lot of that kind of stuff that I think, you know, is constantly around in our culture that tells us as masculine people, that is how we should respond, is by using violence. So that was just another thought I was thinking. And yeah, I'll just pause there again.
They got even like help shows like I think that even help things like it just excuse me, it just doesn't come like out of nowhere.
Oh, Serrano, sorry.
Like, you know, young boys, young men,
It's hard to
all
hear
that
you,
shit has been
Serrano.
like written stone for them like since they were young.
Sorry, Serrano. It's yeah. I'm sorry, but I'm sure you have. You always do. You can type it in the chat. I can read it too. You can read it out as well too. You know, I think that it's not. It's hard to do prevention, but I think if we really ask the question, and it's boring. I've always said that prevention work is boring because people don't want to talk about it if it didn't happen yet, right? But I think that if we really have a vision to what Serrano was sharing earlier, a vision of what community looks like, and to what John was sharing too, then I think how do we hold ourselves accountable to that vision, right? And to that idea of what community could be, right? And so I really appreciate maybe deconstructing the idea of prevention to that question of what are you for and what would you like to see happen, and how do we move towards that? What would be needed in regards to how we move towards that? And then how do we hold ourselves accountable and responsible to that movement towards what that vision and idea of what community could be looks like, right? Yeah, so I think that that's what I wanted to share. I know Serrano said something here, and he is saying, Sean is right. I was just saying that to Peng's point, it is not out of nowhere. Young kids learn how to be violent from a young age. Yes, that is very, very true. Very, very true. Yeah, I agree with you. It is not nurtured. It is definite, or it is not nature. It is nurtured. And that is why we know that violence is such a choice, and a very strategic choice, because there's actually some benefit from using that violence, right? There's some power from using violence that gets lined up, or whatever the case may be. And so, yes, I totally agree with it. But any last, I should say, thoughts or ideas before we give it to Sean to close us out? I know we're short on time, but my hope is that I always appreciate these spaces to be really, and I hope people continue these in their own lives, and continue these conversations as well, to continue thinking and doing reflection for yourselves.
And it's like when a person has like, you know, notes and they're being nasty towards a certain group or certain people, you know, go to a whole store, buys the things that they need to plan out and do the things that they were going to do. Like it's so crushing to think that that shit is out of nowhere. Like, you know, for you to purchase something, for you to go through an actual process and plan, obviously plan and out of nowhere, not in the same field, and they never were. But sadly, those are the only instances where we use somebody who planned to do something that's out of nowhere field. Um, and like we'll lean on like mental health like as quick as we can too. I think it's also because like we don't care about mental health, right? Like think about that. Like so, it's easy to like blame something that we don't care about because you never have to come back to it, right? We don't give a fuck about it, and blame on it. It's like it'll die. It'll die down soon because we also don't want to talk about mental health. So when we chalk it up to the big bad wolf that nobody talks about, then that creates more harm because we're never ever gonna actually like get to the point of it. You know, we're never gonna be able to talk about it because, oh, it's just mental health. And then, well, what is mental health? Oh, we don't talk about mental health. But it's like, well, damn, when do we get to that point of like talking about it? I hope it came through pretty clear too.
Pentti, what are you thinking about? What are your last thoughts as we're wrapping up here? Oh, you're muted.
So it's like too late in the game for me to be making the most basic Zoom mistake. I agree with a lot of what's being said about young boys, especially learning that violence is an option for self-assertion, and I think there's even more allure to that idea because it's maybe framed as like a last resort, like when you've exhausted every other option, then violence is okay. Yeah, and so I think we're right to note that that's one of the places where prevention comes in. And yeah, I mean, in Serrano pointing out that, like, yeah, you know, mental health kind of gets, you know, it becomes the big bad wolf. Yeah, I mean, like, I think it's just I'm suspicious of anything that reduces something as complicated as of say white men doing mass violence as anything that chalks that up to one thing. You know, I was talking with a coworker the other day who pointed out that I think there's some overlap with, you know, domestic violence and mass shooters. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. There's, as violence tends to do, there's, you know, it tends to be tied up in a web with other forms of violence. Yeah, I think that's all I've got.
Whew, yeah, heavy conversation and good too, you know. I guess what's coming to mind for me just in these last moments is that this is normal. Like this sort of a conversation, which to me, you know, maybe a year or two ago would have felt really uncomfortable, especially to have with other folks who aren't actually, you know, a part of doing this work, like those of us on this call here. But yeah, it's really good practice for me, I think. Because I don't have the answers, and I don't know where I thought I was finding answers before, but I really do believe now that it's like it's in these relationships, it's in these friendships, and in these community relationships where you know, I don't think there's a right answer, but there's a bunch of right answers, I think, that came up here today in this conversation that are helpful to me just in how I hold all this stuff. So I'm just feeling grateful for the space again, you know, as I think all of us mentioned at some point. Yeah, these are one of those places where it's like I get that redirect, the refocus back to hope, back to joy, and back to connection in community. Like I think that's what we really are about here, is how do we learn how to reconnect to this way of being in community together that is safe and that feels good for folks, and where folks' needs are being met. So yeah, just grateful for each of you, and definitely sending our best and good energy out to those who couldn't be here today. Roderick and Felix and Ed, wherever you are, sending you lots of love and appreciation. and to all of you who were able to join us, whether you're watching live or after the fact. We're really grateful to be in community with you and that you're joining us here in these conversations. We also want to thank our funding partners, and those are Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota and the Novo Foundation for all of their support, just helping us continue having these conversations. 42nd conversation today. So very grateful for all of their care and support. And as a reminder, if you're newer to these conversations, they happen typically every other Thursday at noon Central Standard Time, live here on our Facebook page, Men and Masculine Folks Network. Our next conversation will be on Thursday, June 16th at noon. And we're excited to be welcoming a guest, a special guest to that conversation, who is I believe she described herself as a healthy masculinity coach and does coaching around healthy masculinity. And so looking forward to speaking more with her and hearing more about what that looks like. That's definitely something we're all interested in, I think. And again, don't forget to like our Facebook page. You can find us on YouTube as well. We would love to connect with you, share your thoughts, comments at any point, and we would love to bring those into our conversations in the future. So thank you again for being here today with us, and sending love to all of you out there. Take good care.